Hey there, welcome to Mike's Collection, episode 361. I'm Mike, and the part of my collection that I'm going to be talking about today are some new Marvel Legends. Now, some of these figures are quite new, like hot off the presses new. Some of the other ones are a little bit older. Some of them are holdovers from 2024 that I didn't get until now. But they're all pretty cool figures, and they're all worth talking about. So, without any further ado, why don't we dive right into it? So the first figure I'm going to talk about here is the Superior Iron Man. Now this figure is a 2024 release. He was actually part of the Zabu Build-A-Figure wave. So oftentimes Marvel Legends, they're released in waves of 6 or 7 figures, and every figure in the wave comes with a piece to build an additional bonus figure. It's a way for Hasbro to kind of rope you into buying figures that you might not have wanted. And it often works. Because from the Zabu Build-A-Figure wave, you needed to buy 6 figures in order to build Zabu, the saber-toothed tiger. And I only wanted 3 of the figures, but I had to buy 3 more that I didn't really want in order to get all the pieces to build Zabu. But there was a 7th figure in that wave, which was the Superior Iron Man. And I did not buy him. Not necessarily because I didn't want him. I thought it was kind of a cool figure, but it wasn't something I needed to buy urgently as soon as it came out. If he had come with a Build-A-Figure piece, I probably would have bought him then. Or if he was a brand new character that I didn't have in my collection already, I would have been inclined to buy him. But I already have probably 24 Iron Mans in my Marvel Legend collection. So even though this one is quite unique in that you can see he's all white, which is, I have some all gold and some all silver. I've got red, lots of red and gold, red and silver, black and gold. Anyway, I don't have anything even close to this, all white, with some black and a couple of little blue highlights as well. I actually think it's pretty cool looking. But I kind of figured, at the end of almost every year, a lot of websites have toys on sale, and I always feel a little bit burned because I see so many toys that I paid full price for during the year on sale at the end of the year. And I always try to tell myself, you should really wait on some of these figures, unless it's something that you absolutely have to have. If it's just something that you would kind of like to have, maybe wait and see if you can get it at a better price. And that's the category that this figure fell into. Not only is it a cool looking Iron Man, but I kind of consider my Iron Mans a collection within a collection, because in my brain, I always kind of have to justify why I have multiple versions of a character. So like with Spider-Man, he's the character I probably have the most different versions of. But if you've seen the Spider-Verse movies, you know that they've established that there's a multiverse with different Spider-Mans from different universes. So when I look at my shelf full of Spider-Mans, I'm like, yeah, that makes sense that I have all these Spider-Men because they're from the multiverse. With Iron Man, he famously has a hall of armor. You've maybe seen it in the comic books or in the movies, where all of the different armors that he has are kind of all lined up. So when I'm buying a figure like this, I don't necessarily see it as a duplicate version of Tony Stark. I kind of see it as a different armor that could be displayed in his hall of armors. So a lot of the Iron Man armors are very similar. They're gold and red, but they're slightly different. This one here, because it is so unique, I really did want to add it to my collection, so I'm glad to finally have it. I did buy it just recently because I've had it in my cart in Amazon for a while, and I always just watch to see if the price is going to drop. And it has kind of ebbed and flowed a little bit, but yeah, it was finally down to about half price recently. In Canada, we pay generally about $35 plus tax for a figure like this, and this figure was down to $20 on Amazon. So yeah, I figured at that price I'll pull the trigger. So I got him. He's cool. My only real worry about this figure is the fact that he is all white. I don't know if he will yellow over time. Lots of action figures yellow over time. Some of the G.I. Joes from the 80s, some of my vintage Transformers, even more modern figures that I've only had for a couple of years. Depending on the type of plastic used, it can turn yellow. And if it's a darker color plastic, like a blue or a green, sometimes you'll notice that it changes hue, but it's not as noticeable as white plastic. Because when white plastic yellows, it turns yellow. And, it can make for some pretty ugly looking stormtroopers and Storm Shadow, white characters like that. So I do worry that in 10 years, this figure might be pretty gross looking if he's all yellowed. And sometimes it even happens on some parts, but not others. So, like, he might end up with yellow arms and legs, but a white torso and a white head. I don't know. Hopefully he stays okay, because not all white figures yellow. It really varies by the plastic, and I don't know, the environment. I don't even really know what causes it, but it is a pain in the ass for toy collectors. Anyway, I like the design of this suit. It's sleek. I like that it doesn't have a mouth slot like most of the Iron Man armors do. It kind of gives it an even more sleek, almost like alien look. I think it is very cool. It came with some extra hands and some blast effects for his hands. He also came with an alternate head, which is not quite an unmasked head. It's a Tony Stark head, but it still has like kind of the most of the helmet on. It just kind of has the faceplate off and his hair is exposed. But anyway, it's a cool head, but it looks kind of evil. He's got these all white eyes, and he's kind of sneering. Now, I'll be honest, I didn't read the comic book series that this is based on, so I don't know a whole lot about it. There was a comic book like miniseries called Axis back in 2014, and I think the gist of it was that bad guys turned into good guys and good guys turned into bad guys as a result of some like magic gone awry. It was mostly an X-Men and Avengers event, so it kind of crossed over into various X-Men and Avenger books, which I really wasn't reading many of those things at that time. I think the only books I bought from the Axis event was the Carnage and Hobgoblin, because those characters are kind of Spider-Man adjacent, which is more my preferred corner of the Marvel Universe. So anyway, yeah, this is supposed to be Iron Man from when he was evil during the Axis event. And I guess that's the name Superior Iron Man kind of ties into the name Superior Spider-Man, which Spider-Man adopted at a time when he was temporarily evil because his brain was taken over by Dr. Octopus. So, yeah, there we go. Superior Iron Man. One last thing to say about this figure. I have seen other people review it, and they've kind of dumped on it because they say in the comic books, this armor was kind of drawn and colored so that it appeared like it was supposed to be all reflective chrome. I don't know what is more accurate. The fact that the Hasbro guys made this white, I assume the white is accurate. Maybe it just looked a little chromy the way it was drawn and the way it was colored in the comic books. I don't know. I think if it was supposed to be chrome, they would have done it chrome, or at the very least like silver. So yeah, some people find it very inaccurate, but I would prefer it in this color scheme than the silver, because we already have all silver Iron Mans, and I think the all white is a little bit more unique. So yeah, pretty cool. Another figure that was kind of standalone. So this didn't come as part of a wave of figures or anything. This is Warbird, or Captain Marvel, Carol Danvers, Moonstone, depending on how you want to consider her. So you guys probably know Captain Marvel, the Carol Danvers that was featured in the Captain Marvel movies and all that sort of stuff. So she's a character that's been around for a long time in the Marvel comic books, and she's had different costumes and different names over the years. She was originally like Miss Marvel, and then she was like Binary, and then she was Warbird, and then eventually Captain Marvel. And anyway, Hasbro released a very nice Captain Marvel figure, Carol Danvers, in what I think is her best costume. So this figure came out like last year, and I thought it was great. It almost made my best of the year list because it's just such a nice sculpt. Didn't quite get there, but yeah, just really nice. From head to toe, great figure. And so then they were basically repainting this figure. It's maybe a little bit tweaked. I don't know if it shares all the same parts. But anyway, this same figure was being re-released in one of her older costumes. So this is a costume that she wore, I think, more from like the 70s. However, there was a storyline about a decade ago where a bunch of villains replaced a bunch of heroes, and they formed a team called the Dark Avengers. And there was a villain called Moonstone who took on the identity of Captain Marvel and she wore this costume. And so that's much more current than back when Carol Danvers actually wore this costume. So, and I believe on the packaging for this figure, it might have even said the Dark Avengers. So I think this is technically supposed to be Moonstone, not Carol Danvers, but you could really display it however you wanted to, I guess. The fact that I already have a really nice Carol Danvers in my collection, I think it makes more sense for me to display this as Moonstone. However, I already have a Moonstone action figure in her supervillain costume, so now I don't know what to do. Anyway, it was a great figure then. It's still a great figure now. I think it came with some extra hands. It might have come with some sort of like power effect. It did come with an extra head, and both are quite nice. I think as it stands right now, I have them both with the exact same head on display, except this one here doesn't have any pupils in her eyes. So maybe that kind of helps represent that she is the villainous version. Whereas if you put this head on it, it's very similar, but the hair is not so windblown. It's kind of just hanging down, and she's got her pupils. You can see her blue eyes there, and the mask is a little different as well. So I guess you could say if you wanted to display this as the heroic Carol Danvers, you could put this head on her. And if you want her to be the villainous Moonstone, you put this head on her. But yeah, great figure. Double jointed knees and elbows. She's pinless. The proportions are great. She's got good feet. The problem with a lot of female figures a couple of years ago is they always put them in high heels, and it made them really difficult for them to stand. I like that this sculpt here has nice flat feet. She's got a sturdy ankles and everything, so she stands up and displays nicely. It's a really solid figure. Yeah. And what else? This is, I'll go right into the newest one. I actually just got this figure like 2 days ago. I think this was just a standalone figure as well. It's not really part of a wave of figures. This here is Professor X, Charles Xavier. Now, this guy here, he came with a bunch of extra hands. I like when figures come with like pointing hands, so that's probably how I'll display him here. They're good for him pointing at things, but they're also good for him to do his little psychic powers when he's thinking. And he also came with the Cerebro helmet. So he puts this helmet on to kind of enhance his powers. You've probably seen it in the X-Men movies when he goes into the Cerebro room when he puts the helmet on. So that's a cool little accessory too. Now, the figure's good. He's wearing his green jumpsuit. Looks like he's ready to go to battle or something in his fatigues type of thing, or go to work at the gas station. I don't know. The head sculpt is good. Now, I was excited about this figure because I'm not a huge Charles Xavier fan. Especially when I think of toys, I still think of it as if I was going to play with them as a kid. And a guy in a wheelchair is not that fun to play with. And even his superpowers are just mental powers. He can read your mind. So like if he was a guy in a wheelchair that could fly or had laser hands, he might have still been fun to play with. But as a guy who just thinks really hard, sitting in a chair, not very exciting. So yeah, he was not really a high priority for me. Plus I've never been I like the X-Men, but I've never really read the X-Men comic books so much. My brother collected X-Men comic books when we were young, so I read a lot of them. But yeah, it's just not one of my favorite corners of the Marvel Universe. Anyway, the only other Professor X figure I have in my collection is this little one from the 3 3/4 inch Marvel Universe line. And this is Professor X, how I more think of him and how probably most people think of Professor X, is he's wearing a suit. And he's got his kind of yellow, futuristic looking wheelchair, similar to what he had in the animated series. And he did have this in the comic books, although he also had a traditional wheelchair for a long time too. So yeah, this is a cool figure, but I've moved on from the 3 3/4 inch line. I collected this line when it was kind of the prominent line. I have lots of these figures, but I switched over to Marvel Legends probably about 10 years ago. And so yeah, I wanted this character in my 6-inch Marvel Legends collection. Now, they have released a couple of versions. They released basically this version in the wheelchair, but you paid a lot more for him. Instead of like $30, this figure was like $70 because you were paying for this big yellow futuristic wheelchair. And again, that's just not that exciting. That's the same price you were paying for Ghost Rider with his motorcycle, but it's much cooler to have a Harley than a wheelchair. So I passed on that Charles Xavier. Then they released another one based on his movie likeness. So he looked like Patrick Stewart, and he came with a traditional wheelchair that you would like push the wheels and stuff. But even that, I was like, nah, I don't really need that because I prefer comic book versions of characters to movie versions of characters. And then maybe, I don't know, several months ago, Hasbro announced that they were going to put the Marvel Legend version of the yellow chair Professor Xavier back up for pre-order. So I guess it was maybe in demand and not everybody got it when it was first released. So even though I passed on it the first time, I thought, you know what? I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to bite the bullet. I'll pay the $70 or whatever to get the stupid yellow chair. So I pre-ordered it. And I've been waiting months for that pre-order to come in. But then, a couple of months ago, they announced that they were going to do this look of Charles Xavier. So this came on a retro card. And this is, I think, labeled Savage Land Professor X. So it was from a time when he actually could walk, and the X-Men would adventure in the jungles of the Savage Land. And I thought, well, yeah, I'll take this one, and I'm going to cancel my chair version. So even though the chair version in the suit is more iconic, this guy would be more fun to play with, and I don't have any problem with this look. I like this look as well. So, yeah, I could have kept both, I suppose, but he's just not a character that I love enough to justify having the two different versions. So, yeah, this guy here does the deed, scratches that itch. I like it. And I don't know, this suit could very easily be reused from another figure, but off the top of my head, I don't recognize this body. So, yeah, it's a good figure. And again, double jointed, pinless, everything you would want in a modern action figure. All right, this guy here is from a wave of X-Men figures that recently came out. But this here is what I would call Ultimate Wolverine. So I already have lots of Wolverines in my collection. I have the yellow and blue, which is the outfit he wore from his first appearance. And then he transitioned into the kind of brown and orange-ish costume, which I have that too. That's kind of his iconic costume from like the 80s and into the 90s. And then when he was part of X-Force, he had his black and gray costume, which is really cool. So I have that too. So yeah, I think that's it. Now they've made dozens of different Wolverine figures, but those are the iconic looks that I needed. And really, this wasn't even on my radar. If you had asked me to do a want list of characters I wanted or looks that I wanted, I wouldn't have had Ultimate Wolverine on there. But when they announced this figure and I saw it, I was like, okay, I kind of have to have that. Because as I've said, I was never a big X-Men reader myself. I've never collected a solid run of X-Men comic books for any length of time, except for in 2000, when Marvel launched their Ultimate lines of comics. That was when they did an alternate universe, and they could start from scratch. Because the movies were coming out around that time. The X-Men movie was successful. The Spider-Man movies were successful. And they thought, this is going to draw a lot of new people into the comic store to read comic books. And they didn't think it was fair. They thought they would lose these new interested readers if they picked up a Spider-Man comic book and realized that there was 60 years of continuity that they had to like wade through to understand what was going on. So they said, we're going to start these books fresh. So the other books, the regular X-Men and the regular Spider-Man book, can continue on as they are. But we're going to start a new universe where the characters are younger and they don't have all this baggage. And I loved the Ultimate Universe, at least when it started. So I have the whole run of Ultimate Spider-Man, the whole run of Ultimate Fantastic Four, a lot of the spin-off series, and I have the entire run of Ultimate X-Men. It is the only time I've ever collected an X-Men series for any length of time, let alone from start to finish the entire run. And so those characters were similar to the characters we know in the Marvel Universe, but there were slight differences. Some of them had different costumes. Some of them were, some guys that were good guys in the regular universe were bad guys in the other universe, things like that. So Wolverine This was his costume in the Ultimate Universe. So that's why I have an attachment to it, because in a way, even though I prefer his masked look from the regular Marvel Universe, this is kind of my Wolverine. And yeah, so I bought this figure because I was thinking this is Ultimate Wolverine, and that's pretty cool. It was only later that I realized that apparently this look was later adopted by the regular Wolverine. I didn't even know that. And in the Extreme X-Men comic book, which was set in the regular Marvel Universe, this was the look he wore when he was part of the Extreme X-Men team. Even the animated X-Men show, he started wearing this outfit instead of the regular one with the mask. So now this look is not necessarily identified as Ultimate Wolverine. I believe the packaging of this figure actually identifies it as Extreme Wolverine. So this is technically the Wolverine from the main Marvel Universe in the outfit inspired by the Ultimate Universe. But as far as I'm concerned, this is Ultimate Wolverine from the Ultimate Universe, and I think it's great. He came with some extra hands and stuff. I think that was really it. But yeah, I like the expression on his face. Yeah, he's short, he's stocky, he's pinless, he's double jointed. I'm going to stop saying that because all these figures are pretty much like that nowadays. But yeah, he's really cool. I'm glad I got him. And now I think maybe this opened the door. I don't know if Hasbro will actually bother doing it, but if they made some more of the Ultimate X-Men characters, I would be open to that. Because as it stands right now, there's so many X-Men characters where I feel I have them already in my collection, so I don't need to buy them again. But if they release the Ultimate versions of them, then yeah, I think I'd have to go for it. And Ultimate Dazzler would probably be my most wanted from that collection. But anyway, pretty cool. Next, I'll dive into another series of figures. This was a 3-pack of figures that was released in 2024, and it kind of pained me to not buy it because I did want it. But it was just, I was buying a 3-pack for one figure that I really wanted. So, one of my favorite Marvel characters, perhaps my favorite Marvel villain of all time, and he's probably in my top 5 favorite characters of all time, is the Green Goblin. And I don't necessarily know why that is. Like, I do think he's great, and I do remember him from the 1960s or 1970s Spider-Man cartoon that aired as reruns when I was a kid. I always liked the Green Goblin. But I had a Green Goblin toy my entire life. I've had it since as long as I can remember. I was born in 1978. This toy, it wasn't really an action figure, but it was like this 12-inch plastic Green Goblin that didn't move, but he had like a flashlight in one hand, and he had like his bag had like moving saw blades if you put a battery in him. I'll put a picture of him in here. I still have this toy, but unfortunately he's broken, his head is off, and his arm is cracked off. But anyway, I've had this toy. It was made in 1978. So yeah, I probably had this thing since I was 2 or 3 years old. I don't really know why I would have had it because it wasn't a great toy for a little kid. Not only did it not move, but it was really hard plastic. You really could have hurt somebody if you smacked somebody with it, and it was kind of brittle. But anyway, since I've had that Green Goblin for as long as I can remember, he's entrenched in my mind as like one of my favorites. Unfortunately, when I got into collecting comic books in 1986, the Green Goblin was already long dead. And you probably know, but like it was a famous storyline where Green Goblin killed Spider-Man's girlfriend Gwen Stacy, and then Spider-Man battled Green Goblin to the death. Although Spider-Man didn't kill him, Green Goblin tried to impale him with his glider, but Spider-Man moved and he impaled himself, just like in the Tobey Maguire movie, essentially. So yeah, it was kind of weird for like my favorite bad guy, my favorite character, to already be dead by the time I started reading comic books. Now, when I was reading comic books, his son Harry had taken on the mantle of the Green Goblin. So there was still a Green Goblin, but he was kind of a wimp sometimes. And then there was a new character called the Hobgoblin who was inspired by the Green Goblin, and he was awesome, but he still wasn't the Green Goblin. But in the 90s, after being dead for like 20 years, Marvel brought Norman Osborn, the original Green Goblin, back from the dead. It was a convoluted storyline where basically they thought he was dead, but the goblin serum in his blood revived him, brought him back to life. He went back to go take his life back, but by the time he did, he realized that Harry had already become the Green Goblin in his place, and he wanted his son to fill the role. So he's like, I'm just going to go to Europe and leave these guys alone. This was the kind of story they created after the fact. And Green Goblin returned in epic fashion in the 90s because his son Harry had been killed at this point, and he wanted to return, get his revenge on Spider-Man, and he did so by engineering the Clone Saga, which we'll talk a little bit more about in a minute. But anyway, ever since Norman's return in the 90s, he has become a bigger villain than he ever was before. Instead of just a little goofball, kind of crazy, flying around on a glider dressed as a goblin, he's become much more dangerous. He's more like a Lex Luthor character. He's become like a villain of the entire Marvel universe and not just Spider-Man. So for a time, he was running S.H.I.E.L.D., like Nick Fury has S.H.I.E.L.D. So Norman Osborn took over. He changed the organization to Hammer, and he ran it in like an evil fashion. So basically, they were publicly supposed to be heroic, but really they were bad dudes. And he took over the Avengers. So he basically canceled the Avengers we all know, and he formed a new team called the Dark Avengers, which included Moonstone taking over the role of Captain Marvel. Same as he had Mac Gargan, the Scorpion, put on a black Spider-Man costume, and he was Spider-Man. Bullseye became Hawkeye. So all of these like villains took over the roles of heroes. And to lead the team of the Dark Avengers, Norman Osborn, the Green Goblin, took on the mantle of the Iron Patriot. So it's basically he took Iron Man and Captain America, the two most famous Avengers, and mashed them together to become this character. So public facing, he was supposed to be heroic, but really he was, up to no good and doing things for his own benefit. And anyway, it was pretty cool. And this is where they really elevated Norman Osborn from not just a Spider-Man villain. Now, there have been many more Norman storylines since the Dark Avengers ended, and Hammer is now back to being S.H.I.E.L.D. and all that sort of stuff. I've always loved Norman, and I'm really glad he's back from the dead. I'm just happy to be able to read new stories with him, even if they're not all great. But anyway, I have a couple of Green Goblins in my collection, including this one here, which I really like. This was from a Spider-Man retro wave. But one of my favorite things about this figure is that it came with an unmasked Norman Osborn head, because almost as much as I like the Green Goblin, I like Norman Osborn, his like alter ego. So to get the Iron Patriot is a figure that I've long wanted. This would have been on my most wanted list. They did make a figure of this guy maybe like 12 years ago before I was collecting Marvel Legends. But even if I had tracked that one down, it was old, it was kind of wonky. We needed a repaint. The only Iron Patriot I had in my collection was this guy here. Again, this is from the 3 3/4 inch Marvel Universe. I really liked this figure, and I would have been happy if they kind of basically just turned this into a 6-inch figure. Instead, we got this one. I still like it. I think it looks cool, but it does look a little bit more plastic, which might seem dumb and obvious to say. But when you look at the little one, it's got that metallic paint job to it. So it's a little more believable as, an armor. Where this one here looks more like, bright, colorful candy. There's no paint wash over it or anything. So again, it's not bad, but I just think, when compared, you're like, I think this one might have looked better if they had went with a little bit more of a metallic paint job. Now, it's a good figure. He's got some swappable hands. He's got some blast effects. Now, he also has an unmasked Norman Osborn head, so you can pop that on there, which is really cool. I might display him in my collection with the Norman Osborn head and with him holding the helmet in his hands. But it is a little odd looking that this Norman head looks kind of sickly, especially when compared to the head that they did a couple of years ago with this Green Goblin. Not only does this head look thinner, but he's got these dark circles around his eyes, like he just hasn't slept for a month or something. And to be honest, when I look at it, it looks more like an unmasked Harry Osborn head, who was really tormented by his inner demons and stuff. That, I might even try and find a way to display this head as a Harry, as opposed to, and have this as my Norman. I don't know. But anyway, this Iron Patriot figure is cool. I really wanted it, but it came in a 3-pack with 2 figures that I didn't really want. And it's not that they were bad characters. It's just I already had these characters a couple of times over. So maybe I'll start with Doctor Doom. So here is the Doctor Doom we got in the Cabal 3-pack. It's a nice looking Doom. No complaints really about it. Very classic looking outfit. What more can you say? He looks great. The thing is, when they released this Doctor Doom a few years ago, they're very, very similar, and I thought this was awesome. I thought this is really the last Doctor Doom I'll ever need. He's great. To this day, I love this figure. But then they released a retro card Doctor Doom a little while later, and this guy had more accessories. He had brighter colors. He had like a soft goods collar on his cape, and I was just like, well, he's pretty cool too. So I went ahead and got this Doctor Doom. Then they released the Secret Wars version of Doctor Doom, which was based on the old 80s action figure I had as a kid. So I was like, all right, well, I'll get this Doctor Doom too. And besides the point, I already had the infamous Iron Man figure, which is actually Doctor Doom when he took Tony Stark's role as Iron Man for a little while. But it looks more like a Doctor Doom than an Iron Man. So yeah, I've got these 4 Marvel Legends Doctor Doom. Not even counting like the little Doctor Dooms I have from Marvel Universe, and I've got Doctor Dooms all over the place. So when they released another Doctor Doom, great figure. If you didn't have a Doctor Doom already, this would have been maybe the highlight of the set. But for me, it just felt a little bit been there, done that. He does come with some accessories. He's got like a little pistol that can be holstered on his waist. I think he has some blast effects as well. But the best thing that he comes with, which makes this figure justifiable, is this alternate head, which looks like a Terminator robot head. Because if you've ever read any comic books with Doctor Doom in it, you know that he often doesn't do things himself. You're thinking you're reading a comic book where Spider-Man is fighting Doctor Doom, and then all of a sudden Spider-Man punches Doctor Doom's head off, and you realize Doctor Doom didn't actually go and do this thing himself. He sent one of his Doom bots in his place. So Doctor Doom employs Doom bots to do his bidding all the time. Sometimes writers have retroactively changed things and said, oh yeah, that thing Doctor Doom did 10 years ago? We don't think he would have done that. Let's just say that was one of his Doom bots gone rogue or whatever. So it's kind of a bit of a crutch for writers to get out of things, but it's a cool concept. I like that he has Doom bots. And in my head, when I'm looking at all my Doctor Dooms over here, I could have just said, yeah, I've got one real Doctor Doom and the other guys are Doom bots. That's how I can justify them being there. But the fact that they actually gave him this head, which is clearly a Doom bot, because he's got these, red robotic eyes. You can't see any human flesh through the eye holes like you can on all these other Doctor Dooms. So I'm definitely going to display this figure with the Doom bot head, and now it completely justifies him in my collection, and it allowed me to buy this Cabal 3-pack with a lot less guilt, because I didn't feel like I was buying a duplicate anymore. And then the one major other thing about this figure that stands out from the others is he's got a soft goods cape. Some people prefer it. I don't know. I don't really have much thoughts on it. It is cool, but I really think the sculpted plastic capes look good too on those other figures. So whatever. The last figure here I want to talk about, I really like this character, and now that I have this in hand, I'm glad I was forced to get him, because if this figure had come out carded on its own for like $30, I don't know if I could have justified spending that $30, but I do love Taskmaster. He is basically a Captain America villain, primarily, and his whole thing is that he runs a school where he trains henchmen. So all the thugs that, Dr. Octopus and Red Skull employ to fight their heroes, they're basically all trained at Taskmaster's School of Henchmen or whatever. And Taskmaster's superpower is that he can memorize anybody's fighting style. So when he's fighting Captain America, it's very hard for Captain America to land a punch because Taskmaster knows exactly what he's going to do because he can read his body language or something to that effect. I've long loved Taskmaster. He's this guy with a cape, buccaneer boots, and a skull face. So a couple years ago, they released a Taskmaster figure, but it was this one. Now, this was kind of a more contemporary armored look. It's not at all Buccaneer style. He doesn't have a cape or boots or big gloves or any of that stuff that is kind of Taskmaster's trademark. This is a contemporary look that he had based on like his appearance from some Deadpool comic books. It's a cool look. It's a cool looking figure, but it just really wasn't Taskmaster, in my opinion. And then a couple years after that, they released this single carded Taskmaster, which is much closer to the Taskmaster I wanted. He's got the cape, he's got the Buccaneer boots and the gloves and the sword, everything. This is much more classic Taskmaster. However, from as soon as I saw this figure when it was first announced and when I got it, I just didn't like the head. How hard is it to do a cool skull head? Well, Hasbro really screwed up this skull head. I hate them. The mouth goes from like across his entire face like a zipper, and it's like this clenching teeth. It looks weird, and I never liked it. But I didn't know if that face alone was enough for me to justify ever replacing this one. So when they made this new figure in the Cabal set, like I said, I don't know if I could have justified paying, an extra $35, $40 to replace this figure. But since I had to in order to get the figures I wanted, I'm glad I have it because it is better than this figure. And it's not just the head. Not only is this head way, way better, and it finally looks like the Taskmaster that I've always wanted. And again, since I've got it here, I'll pull out my this is my 3 3/4 inch Taskmaster. It was pretty good too. So this guy is like a similar version to this. Anyway, not only does he have the better face, but the whole body is actually new. He's got double jointed limbs. He's got no pins. This figure was back in the day when they did still have pins in the elbows and the knees and stuff. So this guy's just a little bulkier. Like he looks a little buffer. The proportions are better. The build is better. The face is better. Everything's better about this figure compared to the previous version. So, at a glance, you might think these two figures are identical, but when you really get up there and scrutinize, you can clearly see that this was a major upgrade. So I am glad that I got them. Okay, so the last few figures I want to talk about here, this is from a new wave of Spider-Man retro carded figures. And when I say retro card, that means they all came on blister cards that resemble the Toy Biz Spider-Man figures of the 90s that were based on the old 90s Spider-Man animated series, which I loved. I have a ton of those old 90s Toy Biz toys. I loved the cartoon. I loved those toys when I was young. Those were kind of probably the last toys I collected when I could get away with still being a kid. Me and my older brother had already stopped collecting G.I. Joes and Transformers and He-Man and stuff together. And around this time, my older brother was totally out of toys, but my younger brother was starting to get into it a little bit. So I kind of transitioned to hanging out with my younger brother a little bit and playing toys with him. And Spider-Man, the animated series, that was kind of our jam. That was like the one thing I had with my brother Brian, as opposed to my brother Doug, before I grew out of it as well. Anyway, so I love those toys, and when I see that retro card packaging, it does bring me back. It's very nostalgic looking. However, the retro card figures don't come with a Build-A-Figure piece, so I'd much rather have a Build-A-Figure piece that results in a free bonus figure as opposed to a little bit of nostalgia on cardboard, but it is what it is. Anyway, they've released a couple of these retro Spider-Man waves, and there's been a lot of really, really cool figures included in them. This one here, I'll start with the least interesting. Well, actually, I'll start with talking about the two figures I did not buy. This was a 6-figure wave, and there was a Spider-Boy action figure. It's a brand new figure, brand new character. I considered getting it just because he's somebody new that I don't have in my collection, but I really hate this character so far. He was just introduced a couple of years ago, and he's supposed to be like a 10-year-old that has spider powers. And the way he was introduced in the comic books was really dumb. And he's supposed to be Spider-Man's like sidekick, and he's just obnoxious. And so yeah, I decided I'm not going to buy that that Spider-Boy toy. It's dumb. And then the other one was an Agent Venom figure, which is cool. I like Agent Venom. It's Venom, but he's more of a soldier. So he's got guns and he's got more armor instead of that typical Venom look we usually know. It was from a time when Flash Thompson, Spider-Man's high school nemesis, wore the Venom symbiote as opposed to Eddie Brock. But yeah, I already have an Agent Venom figure. It was a Target or a Walgreens exclusive figure from several years ago, and it's a good figure. sure, this new version is improved, similar to the Taskmaster. It got rid of the pins in the joints and all that sort of stuff. I'm sure there was lots of improvements made. And probably the biggest improvement was the fact that it came with an unmasked Flash Thompson head, which was cool. But in the grand scheme of things, I'm content with my old Agent Venom figure. And realistically, I probably wouldn't have displayed him without his mask on, because I'd seen in other video reviews that people said the head didn't look right on the body, like the neck made the neck look too long or something. So if I was going to display him with the standard Agent Venom head, it would have been basically looked like the same figure. And anyway, I talked myself out of buying it. But I bought the other 4 figures in the wave, including this one, which is Spider-Man Unlimited, I think. So I don't know anything about this figure, really. I talked about how I loved the Spider-Man animated series in the 90s. But even that, I stopped watching that show before it ended, because it came around kind of late. I was already a teenager, and I stopped watching the show. But after that show ended, I believe this series was kind of a sequel to it, and it was set in the future. And this was like a futuristic version of Spider-Man, kind of like Spider-Man 2099 from the comic books, but I don't know why they didn't just go with that. But it was kind of a new version of that. He even has that same kind of web cape that Spider-Man 2099 has. But yeah, so it's a futuristic version of Spider-Man. I never watched the series. I don't even know if this is supposed to be Peter Parker, to be honest. If it's in the future, it would make sense that it isn't Peter Parker. It's somebody new, like Batman Beyond. But I really don't know. Anyway, I bought it just because I like having different variations of Spider-Man. It's not my favorite variation of Spider-Man. It's fine looking, but it's just not that exciting to me. But it's a nice sculpt. It's a nice paint job. So whatever. So there you go. Spider-Man Unlimited. Next up is the Chameleon. Now, this guy wasn't super high on my want list because I already have a Chameleon figure from a couple years ago. That Chameleon has a 3-piece suit. And that is how Chameleon usually appears in the comic books. So that's kind of my preferred look for Chameleon. However, I think when they were making the cartoon in the 90s, they knew that kids were less likely to want a toy of a guy in a 3-piece suit. So Chameleon appeared in the cartoon and in the 90s toys in this super villain costume, I guess you could call it. It's just like a purple jumpsuit with red shoulder pads. It's kind of weird, but whatever. Here is my Toy Biz version of this Chameleon from way back in the day. Still a good figure. If memory serves, you can pop his head off like so, and he came with a couple alternate heads of like Spider-Man and J. Jonah Jameson, so you could change his identity, even though he's still walking around in Chameleon's costume. So I don't know how well that really would have worked. But anyway, so you can see how well they have replicated this animated look for Spider-Man. I'm happy that they've done it. It's cool to have this alternate version of the Chameleon in my collection. It is better than the suited version in some ways. I think the head sculpt is better here, and he's a little bit taller. So yeah, he looks a little bit more menacing than the version in the suit, I guess. I think for accessories, he just came with his pistol here. So yeah, again, cool figure. I'm pleased with him. This next one, I was pretty excited about. So this here is Electro, but not the Electro that you might know from the old days. This here is classic Electro. He's one of Spider-Man's earliest villains. Max Dillon, the guy with electric powers. Love this guy. He's got a goofy, electric bolt-shaped mask. This figure here from a couple years ago, fantastic version of him. Like it a lot. Anyway, in the comic books, for a time, Electro died, I believe, and his girlfriend, Francine Fry, took on his electricity powers. And the original Electro returned not long afterwards, but now we had 2 Electros running around the Marvel Universe, and we still do. Francine Fry wears this costume. She goes by the name Electro, and she just coexists with the male Electro. Now, I generally don't love characters just taking on the same name. Like, couldn't you come up with something a little different for her? But I think the obvious choice would have been Elektra, but Marvel already has an Elektra character, so I kind of get why they just stuck with Electro. They probably could have still come up with something a little bit more original, but whatever. So, yeah, it's a cool figure. It's well made. I like the paint. It really pops. She also has a cool lightning bolt shaped mask, even though it's not quite as prominent as Max's. Yeah, it's cool. And even though she's been around for, God, I don't know, maybe about 10 years herself, to me, she still feels like a new character. As somebody who's been collecting comic books since I was 8 years old, when they make a toy of a character who was only introduced while I was in my 30s or maybe even my 40s, this feels like a current character. And it's nice to get some current characters and not just characters, that have been around since the 1960s. We need some refreshment every once in a while. And I think they've done a good job of kind of expanding this character in the comic books. They've given her things to do so she doesn't just feel like a ripoff of regular Electro. Yeah, she's cool. And she's on a whole team of female versions of other male villains. And I kind of hope to see that Hasbro does a few more of her little squad. Because, yeah, that would be cool. And the last figure I'm going to talk about, I'm really excited about this guy. I mentioned the Clone Saga earlier. So in the 90s, they introduced the idea of Spider-Man having a clone. And it was actually a storyline from the 70s. In the 70s, there was like 3 issues of a comic book where Spider-Man's insane university professor cloned him, made a second Spider-Man. The 2 Spider-Man both thought they were the original. They fought each other. The clone ended up dying, and Spider-Man went on with his life. 20 years later, Marvel kind of picked up on that storyline, and apparently the clone did not die. Instead, he just got a motorcycle and went across North America and everything and just lived his own life, accepting that he was the clone, essentially. But what prompted him to come back in the 90s was that Aunt May was dying. And he loved Aunt May as much as Peter Parker did because he shared Peter Parker's memories. So he came back. He tried to do it on the sneak, but then Peter saw him and they had to face each other. Peter found out his clone had been alive all this time, and that blew up into a whole big storyline called the Clone Saga, in which we later found out that the clone was actually the original Peter Parker, and that the Peter Parker we've been reading about for 20 years was the clone who had basically inadvertently stolen Peter Parker's life. So the clone, who was now going by the superhero name the Scarlet Spider, he became Spider-Man again. Peter Parker retired, and it was this whole thing for a while, but then we found out that the test results were rigged, and Ben Reilly really was the clone. So Spider-Man came back, and they were like, who could have possibly rigged these results? And then we found out it was Norman Osborn back from the dead. And so that was the big revelation there, was Norman, it was behind this whole thing. And the clone storyline went on for years. And it spanned dozens and dozens of comic books because every issue of The Amazing Spider-Man, The Spectacular Spider-Man, The Web of Spider-Man, and the Adjectiveless Spider-Man comic book all focused on the Clone Saga. Not to mention a bunch of mini-series, Spider-Man Unlimited, all kinds of different stuff. There were so many books about this Clone Saga. It was crazy. It definitely got out of hand, and you could tell writers didn't really know what to do, and they were spinning their wheels. There was a lot of bad stuff that kind of came out of the Clone Saga. So a lot of Spider fans remember it not well. It's not a well-received storyline. But there was a lot of good that came out of the Clone Saga, too. And to be honest, I enjoyed it. I was glad when it was over, but I thought it was a pretty wild ride while I was reading it. And I loved the character of the Scarlet Spider that came out of it. I loved that it brought Norman Osborn back. I liked some of the other concepts it introduced. One of those concepts was one of Spider-Man's clones, the first clone, the first failed clone. So when his university professor was trying to clone him, he made this version, but it was started to deteriorate, and he banished it. He was like, oh, this is a failed experiment. Get out of here. And then he made a better version, which ended up being Ben Reilly, the Scarlet Spider. Anyway, that failed clone, he came back as this character known as Kaine. Although at the time, readers didn't know that this was another clone. It was just this guy in this crazy costume with long brown hair. And it was revealed later that he was also a clone of Peter Parker. And the reason he had to wear this suit was to keep his body from degenerating and all this stuff. And some of his powers, he had this thing called the Mark of Kaine, where he'd put his hand on your face and he'd burn his shape of his hand into your face, which we later learned was basically the same as Spider-Man's sticky hand power, except it was so much more powerful in the clone that it would like rip your skin off by doing it. So all of his powers were basically twisted versions of Spider-Man's powers. And he was a scary villain. He was big. He was menacing. And he was Kaine. And we finally have an action figure of him. Now, his design, it's pretty weird. Like, if you told me to come up with an evil clone of Spider-Man, I would not think to come up with this guy in this kind of all black onesie with some weird, like, ventricose veins running all over the outside of his costume, and then like a torn towel around his neck. It's a weird costume, but it is what it is, and I can't help but love it. I think it's cool. Anyway, I do have a Kaine figure from the 90s from Toy Biz. It's kind of a slap together figure. It's not particularly well done. Yeah, he's got this piddly little cape on the back. All the veins on the outside of the costume are just kind of painted on a generic body. I don't really like the face sculpt because they just took the head sculpt from like somebody else and painted the face blue. So all the features like the nose and the lips and everything are all very prominent, which I don't really like. I have long wanted an update of Kaine. I would have loved to have a Kaine when I was collecting the Marvel Universe figures, but they never did it. And now it took them years, to finally give us a Kaine in Marvel Legends. But I think it's a long, long time coming, and I think they really knocked it out of the park. The colors are not necessarily 100% cartoon or comic book accurate. The face sculpt, you actually can't see his features through the mask, which is not really comic book accurate either. Like, this one is too distinct. Like, it doesn't even look like a mask. It looks like they just painted somebody's face. Where it should be kind of somewhere in between the two. Because you could always kind of make out some of Kaine's facial features, but not with that much detail. This one here, you basically can't make out any of them. He has no mouth or anything to speak of. But I actually really like this look. I think this figure came out great. I like the kind of windswept cape. I love the head sculpt with the hair kind of blowing. I think it's awesome. So it's a pretty simple figure in design. But yeah, all those veins, by the way, they're all sculpted onto him. So like, this is not a toy that they're likely to reuse for any other characters. It's obviously all new sculpted parts for Kaine. He's also got these weird fins on his legs and on his hands, almost like Batman. I don't really remember Kaine having those in his costume, so I don't know if they added those for just some extra flair. Maybe they are accurate. I just don't recall. But they look cool anyway, so I don't mind that they're there. Yeah, just very, very excited to get this guy. He would have been near the top of my want list. I do have a soft spot for that Clone Saga. I would like to see some of the other weird characters, like the female Dr. Octopus, or the Scryers, or Judas Traveler, or Robot Master. There was a lot of characters from the Clone Saga that I think would make cool toys. And who knows, maybe this is a sign of things to come. Probably not, but anyway, very, very cool. But we're at about the hour mark, if not more than that, so I should probably wrap things up. So that's it. Those are my new Marvel Legends. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, make sure to hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll be back with another video soon. I'll see you then.